Welcome back, and now the news in detail. Pakistan military's spokesperson Major General Babar Iftikhar says India is using Afghan soil against his country. Speaking to foreign journalists in Rawalpindi, he said India is aiding terrorists through weapons and funds. He said Afghan intelligence agencies are aware of India's activities on their soil. The DGISPR said Pakistan has no favorites in Afghanistan and that it only wants peace in the war-torn country. He also highlighted Pakistan's constructive role in the Afghan peace process. To a question, Major General Iftikhar said security forces have eradicated organized terror groups in North Waziristan. He added that several key arrests have been made in connection to the killing of 11 coal miners in Balochistan last month. We are joined by defense analyst Major General Ijaz Afwan, retired. So thank you for your time at Indus News. How significant Major General Iftikhar's interaction with a foreign journalist is, especially at a time when India is trying to prove its false narrative by detouring cherry-picked European diplomats to occupied Kashmir?
Well, I think it's very important, and it's not for the first time. Pakistan is trying since long, through a diplomatic maneuver, through political action. We are trying to inform the world, and particularly Permanent Five and the Western countries, about Indian involvement in our internal affairs, starting from Kulbhushan Yadav and thereafter. We have already shared our dossiers with the United Nations, indicating those 66 camps that are established in Afghanistan, where RAW is abetting terrorists, and they are supporting them, funding them, and giving them even targets where to strike. And we also have an evidence where Indian hand was found, and we had the evidence about strike in APS and later strikes in Stock Exchange Karachi and Chinese mission there in Karachi. So there is a considerable evidence available with Pakistan, which Pakistan keeps sharing. So it's important from that point of view, but what kind of pressures are going to come on India, that only time will prove.
So General Iftikhar pointed to India's use of Afghan soil to foment terrorism in Pakistan. In this sort of a scenario, what role do you think the Afghan authorities should play?
Well, Afghan authorities can play a role, but unfortunately, the position that they have been taking since long is that they do not have a full control over the entire area of Afghanistan, and there are certain no-go areas for the government of Afghanistan. And they very easily take refuge in their inability, incapacity for not having been able to establish their writ across the country. And that is where they get away with it. There could be less of desire to cooperate or a political will to cooperate, or there could be an incapacity issue. But I don't think the present government of Afghanistan is really very committed and very serious, and they really wish to do something against those elements which are trying to create situations in Pakistan, whether they belong to TTP or Baloch Liberation Army or whatever organization they are. NDS and RAW, of course, they are in picture as to what's happening in Pakistan and who are doing it. That is to be seen.
So, General Afwan, how detrimental is India's support to terrorists in Afghanistan, especially during the ongoing peace process over there?
Well, India, in my personal view, India is a country which does not want to see Afghanistan stable, because they have been selling a narrative to the rest of the world since long, and they believe and they try to convince the world on baseless issues, but they do try that if there is a stability in Afghanistan, these terrorists who are fighting there, they may gravitate towards Kashmir, on being the Muslims in Kashmir who are suffering at the hands of Hindu fascist government. So that is the transition of this threat, or the movement of this threat from Afghanistan to mainland India or in Indian-occupied Kashmir, is a probability which they keep selling. It may not be a reality on ground.
Major General Ijaz Afwan, retired. Thank you very much for talking to Indus News. I really appreciate that. Now, moving on, Indian troops have marched 2 Kashmiris during a military raid in the Islamabad district of occupied Kashmir. The authorities also suspended internet service in the district to hide the brutalities of Indian forces in the area. Nearly 300 Kashmiris have been killed by Indian troops since New Delhi revoked the occupied valley's special status in August last year. The valley has been under a crippling curfew and a communications blackout since then. Pakistan has repeatedly called for a global action on extrajudicial killings of Kashmiris. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says the Kashmir issue should be resolved through the UN resolutions. He was speaking at the Trade and Investment Conference in Colombo after meeting with Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Prime Minister Imran Khan said he is optimistic about peace in the subcontinent and the conflicts in the region must be addressed through dialogue. Imran Khan said the subcontinent has tremendous business opportunities and trade in South Asia should be linked like the European Union. He also offered Pakistan's mediation between China and the United States. Speaking at the event, Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi noted that Pakistan's ranking in ease of doing business has improved. Meanwhile, Pakistan's advisor on commerce, Abdul Razak Dawood, invited Sri Lankan business persons to invest in the China-Pakistan economic corridor. The conference was organized by Pakistan's Ministry of Commerce and was attended by the top dignitaries of both countries.
In India, farmers have threatened to block and shut the country's parliament down if the centre does not repeal the agricultural laws. Farmers leader Rakesh Tikayat says 4 million tractors will rally on New Delhi's roads instead of the 400,000 on January 26th. Addressing a grand meet, Tikayat urged the farmers to be prepared for the Delhi march as the call for it can be given at any time. He added the Republic Day violence in Delhi was a conspiracy against the farmers. Meanwhile, another farmer from Punjab destroyed his wheat crop in protest against the 3 laws. Russia has urged the US administration to step up efforts to revive the Iran nuclear deal. In a news conference, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called the agreement critical in securing a nuclear weapons-free Middle East. He said all stakeholders must strive to restore the deal for the world community. Meanwhile, China has called for lifting of sanctions on Iran as its nuclear program is at a critical juncture. This comes a day after Iran officially began restricting international inspectors from examining its nuclear facilities. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has told the UN Human Rights Council that his country will seek election to the rights body for the 2022 to 24 term. The announcement comes 3 years after former President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the council. Blinken said the U.S. wants the Human Rights Council to eliminate what he says is a disproportionate focus on Israel. He added that Washington will continue to call out abuses in places like Venezuela, Cuba, and Iran. Elections for 3-year membership on the 47-member council are due at the UN General Assembly in October. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says all the countries must back Ankara's justified fight against terrorism. Speaking in Ankara, he said Turkey's counter-terror operations within and across its borders are the country's legitimate right. Erdogan said, like every state in the world, Turkey has the right to bring the fight against terrorism to its source. Turkey has bemoaned Western countries' lack of cooperation in its fight against the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Earlier this month, the PKK killed 13 people in a cave in northern Iraq, including 12 Turkish citizens. Ankara says Western countries were slow to condemn the death of Turkish civilians at the hands of the group. Protesters have taken to the streets in Myanmar for the 21st straight day against the February 1 coup. Demonstrators are gathering to hold a multi-ethnic rally in Yangon in the northern part of the commercial hub of Yangon. Indonesia says Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi will not travel to Myanmar to hold talks with the country's military leaders. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry said the decision comes after the input of other ASEAN countries that this is not the ideal time for the visit. Earlier, the group of 7 condemned intimidation and oppression of those opposing the coup. Amnesty International has called on the Malaysian government to explain the decision to deport more than 1,000 Myanmar nationals despite a court-ordered stay. The court on Wednesday fixed March 9 to rule on whether the groups would be allowed to challenge the deportation. The court also extended the stay order, barring the remaining 1,014 detainees from being deported before the next hearing. The Kuala Lumpur High Court on Tuesday had granted a stay on the deportation amid fears of their safety. But hours after the ruling, Malaysian authorities repatriated them on 3 Navy ships sent by Myanmar's military. Malaysia is home to more than 154,000 asylum seekers from Myanmar, where the military has seized power this month. In Nepal, the heir of Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli says the Premier will not resign, adding that only the Parliament can decide his fate. This comes a day after the Supreme Court rejected Oli's decision to dissolve the legislature and call early elections. Following the court's verdict, the ruling Nepal Communist Party has decided to call a meeting of the lower house. Meanwhile, thousands of people took to the streets of the capital Kathmandu and celebrated the court's decision. They raised slogans against Oli and pressed fresh demands for the Premier to resign. The country has been in political turmoil since December after President Bidya Devi Bhandari dissolved the parliament on Oli's recommendation. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Ecuador, at least 75 people have been killed and dozens are wounded in riots between rival gangs at 3 prisons. The government describes the violence as a concerted action by criminal organizations. The riots erupted in prisons in Guayaquil, Cuenca and Latacunga cities simultaneously. Officials say the order was restored with the help of an additional 800 police officers. The government says some police officers were also wounded during the riots. President Lenin Moreno has declared a temporary state of emergency in prisons across the Andean country. Italy has asked the UN to launch an investigation into the killing of its ambassador to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Addressing the parliament, Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio said Rome has asked the UN to clarify reasons behind the security arrangements used. The envoy, Luca Atanasio, died on Monday after a UN convoy was ambushed near the border with Rwanda. His Italian bodyguard and a Congolese driver were also killed. The DRC blamed the killing on a Rwandan rebel group. In Nigeria, at least 10 people have been killed and 50 others wounded in a string of mortar attacks in northeastern Maiduguri. Officials blamed the Boko Haram militant group for the mortar attacks. The militants targeted 4 different areas of the city with mortar fire. Security forces moved in quickly to push back the terrorists from the city's outskirts. The global number of coronavirus cases has crossed 112 million, with the death toll exceeding 2.48 million. Brazil has reported over 1,300 COVID-19 deaths in a day, while its tally is over 248,000. More in this report.
While some governments are easing the coronavirus curbs due to lowering cases, warnings of spring waves driven by the new variants and hiccups in the inoculation drives pose a major challenge to fight the coronavirus. Experts have rung the alarm bells over a more contagious UK variant likely to fuel a surge of cases around April and May in the United States. Meanwhile, the CDC data proves racial inequality marring the vaccine drive in the United States. In Bolivia, prosecutors clashed with riot police to demand the repeal of a controversial health law banning them from going on strike during the pandemic. In Greece, doctors have gone on strike and dozens marched in Athens to protest suffocating conditions at hospitals during the pandemic.
This is not a law that answers the necessities of the country. The government tells us that we are inhuman, but they are the ones who are inhuman, as they have done absolutely nothing to improve Bolivia's health system for decades. That is why we are out on the streets to tell the government to stop with unconstitutional laws.
Europe's vaccine drive is far behind schedule, with Brussels confirming that AstraZeneca will fall short of its promised delivery by more than half. In the United Kingdom as well, the number of vaccines administered has fallen by over a third in the last week due to a dip in supply. Hospitalizations in France have hit a 12-week peak as regional officials urge for a ban on public gatherings. Ireland is reopening the schools, but at the same time has extended other lockdown restrictions until April. Meanwhile, the Netherlands slightly eased COVID-19 restrictions while keeping in place the controversial nighttime curfew.
Het tweede waar ik heel duidelijk over wil zijn.
I want to be clear that we only take these risks today because of the existing measures. That includes the curfew and the advice to welcome only one person a day at home. All the measures we extend today will be in place until March 15th. But if the infections rise again, then all other options to tighten the rules will be on the table again.
Meanwhile, the World Bank has threatened to suspend its multi-million-dollar financing for Lebanon's vaccination drive over politicians jumping the line.
Pakistan has lost 50 more lives to the new coronavirus over the past 24 hours. The death toll has risen to 12,708. Health officials says 1,196 more people have tested positive, out of which 574,000 infected so far. More than 538,000 people have recovered. However, there are still 24,000 active COVID-19 cases in Pakistan. In Abu Dhabi, Pakistan's chairman, Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee, General Nadeem Raza, has called on UAE Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Hamad Mohammad Thani Al-Rumaiti. In a statement, the military's media wing said the two officials discussed regional issues, including the situation in Afghanistan and Kashmir. They also discussed bilateral cooperation, including counterterrorism. The two sides agreed to enhance military engagements and vowed to forge deeper strategic ties. German Joint Chiefs of Staff also visited an international defense exhibition. General Raza lauded the efforts in showcasing Pakistan's indigenously manufactured defense equipment at global level. President Joe Biden says the U.S. has no closer friend than Canada. This comes as Biden held his first bilateral meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. The virtual meetup sought to turn a page on the Trump era, stressing deep ties between the two countries. Biden said Washington and Ottawa will coordinate on a wide range of issues, including COVID-19, economic recovery, and refugees. The U.S. president said he has agreed with Trudeau to work together towards achieving the goal of net zero emissions by 2050.
Canada and the United States are going to work in lockstep to display the seriousness of our commitment at both home and abroad. To that end, we're launching a high-level climate ambition ministerial, and to align our policies and our goals, and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.
Trudeau welcomed Washington's renewed attention to climate change in contrast to the former U.S. administration. Now, moving on, a U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee has held a hearing on massive cyber attacks that targeted government agencies. Top executives from SolarWinds, Microsoft, FireEye, and CrowdStrike Holdings attended the hearing. The executives told the committee that they were still trying to assess the damage of the hacks. They defended their conduct in the breaches and sought to shift the responsibility elsewhere in their testimony. They also warned the lawmakers that the intrusion is bigger and more dangerous than first realized. The executives argued for greater transparency and information sharing about the hacks with liability protections.
We do need to enhance the sharing of threat intelligence. Now, that's the term in the cybersecurity community for information about attacks that people are seeing. And our basic challenge today is that that information too often exists in silos. It exists in silos in the government, exists in different companies. It doesn't come together.
The hacks blamed on Russia targeted about 9 federal agencies and about 100 U.S. companies. Now moving on, Mexico has urged the United States to provide details on the arrest of the wife of jailed Mexican drug lord Joaquim El Chapo. However, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador termed the detention as a U.S. matter. Talking to reporters, Obrador said he hoped Washington will share further information about the arrest. He added her arrest may be linked to the case of former Mexican Security Minister Genaro Garcia Luna. Emma Coronel Aispuro was arrested by authorities at an airport just outside Washington on Monday. The U.S. Justice Department charged her with helping Guzman continue to run his drug cartel during his imprisonment. In Ukraine, at least 27 law enforcement officers have been injured in clashes with protesters near the presidential office in downtown Kiev. Several thousand people across Ukraine are protesting against a court ruling in the case of civil activist Serhiy Sternenko. In a statement, the city police department said protesters used spray and flares against the officers. The department said police detained 24 protesters after they did not respond to their calls. Earlier, the court gave a guilty verdict against Sternenko, who has been convicted of abduction. Heavy floods have displaced more than 15,000 people in Peru's eastern Madre de Dios region. Officials say the floods damaged at least 1,500 homes, knocking out electricity and water supply. They said torrential rains caused the rivers to break their banks and damage infrastructure. The government had declared a state of emergency in the Amazon region, which borders Bolivia and Brazil. Rescue and relief efforts are underway to help thousands of people displaced by the flooding.
Now the most immediate thing is to care for the people who have been affected by the overflows of the rivers and see how they deal with food issues, health issues. Remember that we are still in a pandemic, so this is something that compounds problems that these victims face.
Golf great Tiger Woods has undergone surgery after sustaining multiple leg injuries in a car crash in Los Angeles. The lengthy surgery required the insertion of a rod, screws and pins to stabilize his leg. A statement on his Twitter account says Woods suffered serious leg injuries in the crash, including shattered ankle and 2 leg fractures. Reports suggest that his injuries are not life-threatening, but they can become a hurdle in his playing career. Earlier in a press conference, Sheriff Alex Villanueva said there was no evidence of driver impairment. He said Woods appears to have been traveling at a relatively greater speed than normal. Fellow golfers, former US President Barack Obama and others tweeted in support of Woods. China has launched a new satellite into space to study electromagnetic environment detection. Local media reports say the remote sensing satellite was launched from northwestern China's Gansu province. Meanwhile, China's Tianwen-1 has entered the parking orbit around Mars before landing a rover on the red planet in the coming months. The probe will operate in the orbit for 3 months with all payloads on board the orbiter powered on. Citizens of the Gaza Strip have breathed a sigh of relief as they will now have a chance to access reliable energy. Officials say talks on a gas pipeline have moved from the abstract to the concrete level in the recent weeks. More in this report.
For years, a gas pipeline project was a far-fetching dream due to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Peace talks between the two sides broke down in 2014 and never resumed amid mutual suspicion and outbreaks of violence. But Israeli, Palestinian, Qatari, and European interests have converged in recent weeks with the aim of bringing the energy source to Gaza in 2023.
The Gaza Strip has been suffering for years from a suffocating electricity shortage. There's only 200 megawatt of power available, while this winter we needed around 500 megawatt.
The plan will see natural gas from the deep water of Leviathan Field in the eastern Mediterranean flow into Israel. From there, the gas will move into Gaza through a proposed new extension. Under the arrangement, Qatar will fund Israeli side of the pipeline, while the European Union will pay for the section in Gaza.
The recent breakthrough in the power deal about connecting power plant with natural gas has been received positively, and there were positive reactions in the Gaza Strip. That will be good for the electricity distributing company because that means there will be reduction in the expenses. Also, that will be reflected on the production process.
If successful, the pipeline project will provide a steady energy source to the Gaza Strip for the first time in years. The gas strip will bring an end to the rolling blackouts that have crippled the economy of the blockaded Palestinian enclave.
Age has no limits. It is certainly true for this 81-year-old fitness grandma who has taken TikTok by storm. More in this report.
TikTok, a social media platform of the young trend-setting crowd strutting their stuff, is now home to Germany's very own 81-year-old fitness dame. Nicknamed Fitness Gran, Erika Rischko is not letting Corona get to her and definitely has no plans for sofa bingo. Instead, she's conquering TikTok one press-up and one cha-cha at a time. Rischko has uploaded more than 100 videos of herself doing exercises like planks and push-ups, as well as dancing. to encourage others to remain active during the lockdown.
Super, ist einfach toll.
This is super, just great. I am super happy about it. I have never been as confident about myself as I am at this moment. This whole thing really gave me a push, all of this, TikTok and Instagram.
She has amassed around 125,000 followers and more than 2 million likes on the app. And her fame has spread beyond Germany, with the spry Langfeld local now also a fixture in America.
Könnt ihr nicht unsere Großeltern sein?
Will you be our grandparents? These are some requests we get. Or, my granny is dead, couldn't you take her place? I live here, but I live even further away. Especially the Americans with their God bless you. All these, it's just amazing and crazy. Nobody was expecting this. I thought people would watch us, but all this attention, it's just crazy.
Rishko, who reads all the comments after breakfast, beams at the cameras and gets ready for her next challenge.
We've got more stories coming your way, but right after a short break, stay tuned. Lows and the highs of the business world. Now the Wall Street stocks have opened lower as high-flying growth stocks continue to be pressured by valuation concerns. The tech-heavy index of Nasdaq Composite fell as shares of Apple, Amazon and Microsoft slid over 1%. The indices of S&P 500 and DJI also traded marginally lower. Meanwhile, oil prices edged up despite a surge in the U.S. crude inventories. Britain's biggest airport has reported a $2.8 billion annual loss after passenger numbers hit the lowest levels in 5 decades. Heathrow normally sees 80 million passengers per year, but it said numbers in 2020 dropped to 22 million due to the pandemic. The airport authority said Heathrow has $5.5 billion of liquidity, which could keep it going until 2023. They called on the government to agree on a common international travel standard to allow passengers to start flying in the summer. They've also demanded business tax breaks for airports to help them ride out of the crisis. Last year, Heathrow lost its title as the busiest in Europe to Paris as its flight schedules contracted more than its rivals. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.